Yeah. Okay, so I'd like to welcome all of you to the Food Justice webinar offered by Project Look Sharp at Ithaca College. My name is Louise Holmes and I play a very small role right here at the beginning. I'm just going to take you through a couple of things so that you can participate in the webinar fully as it's designed, and I do also want to make the comment that I've been a fan of Project Look Sharp for many years. So it's wonderful to see all of you here, and I'm delighted that you're joining us. So first of all, I wanted to let you know, if you're just joining, it's great to have you chat all throughout the webinar in that window, that chat window that you see in the lower right of your slide. There are also some files we'd like you to download if you haven't that we'll refer to, that Sachs will be referring to as he speaks. He's our featured presenter tonight. So if you would go ahead and look above the chat where it says Files and click or hold down the Shift key and click on each of those and then click Download. When a window opens up, click Download one more time and you will have those documents available to you. The other thing is, if you have a question at any point, you can just go ahead and type in that chat. You also have a little guy, a little man, sometimes we call him Lenny, above your slides with his hand up in the air and an arrow to the right where you can select some things here like raise your hand if you have a question. Or if you can't hear Sachs and you want him to speak a lot more loudly, then go ahead and make that selection or applaud him. So the other thing is, if you have not yet introduced yourself in that chat, please go ahead and do that. We'd love to hear from you. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome the founder and co-executive director of Project Look Sharp and Professor Cindy Scheid. So welcome, Cindy.
Thanks, Louise. So welcome to everybody. It's nice to see such a nice crowd, particularly around this topic of food justice. For those of you not familiar with Project Look Sharp, we're a program of Ithaca College. We've been around about 20 years. We do curriculum development for K through 12 classes in all curriculum areas, ranging from social studies to math and science. And we also do professional development through workshops, webinars such as this, keynotes, and so forth. And tonight it is my pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, Sachs Berry, who is our program affiliate and our main curriculum writer. And he is really one of the world's leading authorities linking media literacy to issues of environmental issues and impacts and climate change and sustainability. And I know that food justice is a particularly strong interest of his. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Sachs.
Thank you, Cindy. Delightful to be here with everyone tonight. I must say that's the first time I've ever been introduced as a world authority in anything. So I'll be probably debating that point myself throughout the evening, but it's great to have you all with us, and very excited to do this webinar. I know a number of you have not been at Look Sharp webinars before. Some of you have. Our intention is always to really make this interactive, and fairly shortly I'll be asking you to weigh in again in the chat box. Lou had asked before about the prospect of asking questions during the course of the presentation. I'm designing this so that we'll have time at the end to field your questions, and we'll probably not interrupt during the course of the presentation and our interactive part to address individual questions, just so that we can get to the material at hand. But we will have time at the end, and we'll probably also spend time online after we formally close at 8 o'clock to continue the chat if you're interested. I want to just linger for a minute on this graphic at the very beginning, because I think it's a really excellent representation of our understanding of media literacy as a pedagogical concept. I actually used it for the first time in a workshop in St. Louis a month or two ago as a media code to decode, asking people what they understood the messages to be about media literacy, and also what they could discern about Project Look Sharp, the producer, And I want to give particular credit to Cindy Scheib for pulling this graphic together as a part of our collective process. It's also a reminder to me that as we move through the process tonight, in addition to our concern with content material around food justice, equity, economy, sustainability, we're also as interested in how we learn, how we come to know what we know. And I think, again, this graphic is a great invitation for students to really reflect on their own learning, which I'm finding more and more as a lifetime educator and a central part of our learning process, to call attention to how we know what we know. So I'm going to move it on from here, talk a little bit about the goals for the webinar tonight. There are really three primary goals. One is to explore the ways in which we can tie our goals of different sorts to teaching content in the actually design of lessons. So each one of the examples I'll be giving will begin with an understanding of how we can tie our goals as teachers or presenters, community members, to designing lessons or media document opportunities for people to decode together. Secondly, this will be an opportunity to practice a key media literacy skill that Project Look Sharp uses all the time: media document decoding and question creation. Both of these central to our understanding of the process of media literacy. And it'll also be an opportunity to tour some of the curriculum materials that are all available free and online to you at Project Look Sharp's website. If you haven't already sampled those, I encourage you to do that, and I'll be letting you know where you can find the particular materials tonight as we go. And finally, an opportunity to really answer your questions, as I said before, about the topic, about teaching, wherever you'd like to go. I'm going to get right into the core of what we want to work on tonight before we get to our first chat. And when it comes to defining lesson goals, it's really important, of course, to identify first what those particular goals are. And you might have many different kinds, but what I want to talk about tonight really will be three different kinds of goals. One is content goals. In this instance, content having to do with issues related to food security. The second has to do with Common Core skill goals. This will be for those of you who are teaching in the K-12 settings. I understand that not everybody attending tonight actually is a teacher in a K-12 setting. Some of you are at a university, some in the community. I want to comment that I've used many of the materials that we're using tonight most recently in community education contexts. So these are not only useful, I think, as tools in a classroom context, but also in community education, raising issues around food security, food sovereignty, equity throughout our communities. And then finally, we're also interested, of course, in particular goals relating to media literacy skills. So as I design these mini lessons tonight, you'll notice that each of these three kinds of goals are coming up. We'll be using examples to begin with from our KIT's lesson collections, Media Constructions of Sustainability, Food, Water, and Agriculture. And this really focuses in on the content area of what we're concerned with. This is a part of our website that focuses on the Common Core standards. So for those of you who are teaching in school contexts, teaching to the Common Core standards, you'll find an index that directs you to particular lessons within our 19 curriculum kits that will teach to specific Common Core standards. In this instance, the example of reading for science and technical subjects. And this, of course, is the key questions to ask when analyzing media messages. This is one of the handouts. If you haven't already clicked on that handout, you can download this and have it available tonight. And this is a wonderful tool that I use all the time as a teacher designing curriculum to think about the sets of questions relating to audience, message, meaning, bias, mission, representation, reality, relating to media literacy forms. So we'll go right into the first lesson that we want to take a look at. This comes from lesson 9 in the Media Construction of Sustainability kit. You can see that underneath the image of the kit itself. And again, all these materials are free and available to you, including the digital materials, the videos that you'll see. All the print materials are available for you for free. And this particular lesson, lesson 9 on food security, is dealing with 3 different lesson intentions. In terms of content, we're focused on what are the conditions required to attain food security and what are the causes of food insecurity as well. The Common Core skill in particular that we'll focus on in this is from reading in science and technical subjects, the skill identified as integrating and evaluating multiple sources of information, which of course is not just textual, but multiple kinds of media forms that we'll be presenting tonight. And the media literacy skills tied into this particular mini lesson have to do with authorship, who made this particular media document, and for what purpose. I also want to state that for each of these lessons, there's a good bit of background information that's useful for students and learners to have. This material is included, again, in digitally available kits from Project LookSharp. In this instance, there's a lesson introduction that talks a bit about the history of food security going back to the 1948 UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that everyone has the right to a standard of living adequate for the health and well-being of himself and his family, including food. We then go on to note some of the particular affirmations of food security from the World Food Summit in Rome in 1996, the Rome Declaration on World Food Security, and perhaps most importantly, concluding that introduction with a quote from Wes Jackson, the wonderful plant scientist that I know some of you are familiar with, who said, if we don't get sustainability right in agriculture, it won't matter whether we get it right anywhere else. And I think clearly Wes is right on this count, and that's part of the reason that we're doing this whole workshop tonight. We listen hard and deep to Wes. So we'll begin by looking at a very brief video. One thing I want to note is that the videos you see tonight are all in the 1-2 minute range, and that's deliberate, really condensed content. We're always selecting very brief video excerpts chosen for a particular purpose. And in this first instance, we're going to be looking at content goals, teaching to content goals. So let's do some chatting as you watch this clip about what the causes of food insecurity are. And feel free to type as we're watching the clip. Kelsey, you can go ahead and play it. If you can't access it for any reason,
have soared.
Check
in the
the
first half
Vimeo
of 2008,
below.
U.S. farmers saw fuel prices jump 40% and fertilizer go up 60%. But a report by the World Bank says the biggest factor driving 75% of the increase was biofuels, crops like corn and soybeans being used to power a new generation of cars and energy equipment instead of feeding hungry mouths.
To use 30% of the U.S. maize production for biofuel, frankly speaking, is not very helpful.
Others say the real culprit is global prosperity. the growing ranks of middle-class steak eaters in China and India.
It's a good thing. We like to see increasing consumer demand and increasing disposable income so that people begin to buy more food.
With every extra pound of porterhouse requiring 7 extra pounds of feed, the worldwide demand for grains has soared. Then there's the issue of subsidies. In the U.S., as well as the EU, Japan, and other wealthy nations, the government effectively pays farmers to grow crops. This keeps the farms afloat, but drives small farmers in poorer countries out of business. Meanwhile, protectionist policies aren't helping things. Pakistan has clamped down on exports. The Philippines is stockpiling rice. As a result of all this, humanitarian aid agencies are struggling to replenish emergency stock.
So as you can see, there are a number of different potential answers just in this minute-and-a-half clip about potential causes of food insecurity as recognized and constructed by the people who made this particular video clip. We'll now show a second clip that will present a whole other set of answers to this question. And once again, I'll just encourage you to chat, as you've been doing, about the potential causes of food insecurity recognized here. And for any reason you can't access it, go to the Vimeo link that's listed underneath.
Without action, climate change will cause widespread decreases in crop yields. For every 1 degree rise in temperature, we get a 10% decline in agriculture production. As oil becomes more expensive, the cost of food will soar. Water shortages threaten to reduce the global food supply by more than 10% in the next 25 years. In poverty-stricken areas, the growth of agriculture productivity isn't keeping up with population spurts. If we don't work to counteract these effects, we will lose our ability to grow enough affordable food on our planet. By 2030, there will be an estimated 1.8 billion more people to feed. Instability and political unrest rise as food becomes more scarce. If we don't act now, it may be too late.
Now, from a pedagogical perspective, I just want to note how many different people have been weighing in on answers that they've harvested from these two videos in just a very brief period of time. And I'm thinking, as a teacher, wanting engagement. This is an opportunity now to engage many different voices. And if we had a classroom setting where we were all together, we could spend the rest of our hour simply talking about these various arguments for the causes of food insecurity and move forward with that. So this is clearly an opportunity to go deep into the teaching of content goals around this. Also want to just point out that the lesson itself, as it appears in our media construction kit, also asks students, invites students in the worksheet to identify the potential source of each of these videos based on the handouts that you can download that relate to the particular mission, the producers, the mission statements of the producers here. In this instance, the first video that you saw was produced by the Foreign Policy Association, and the second video that you saw, video number 2, we just saw by the U.S. State Department. We're going to move on to a third video, even briefer. And the chat here has to do with what are the conditions required to attain food security as presented by this source.
Community food security is a concept that basically means that a community has adequate amounts of culturally appropriate food that's easily accessible by people. And, you know, we like to add on this grown by sustainable means. So when a community is in that condition, we consider it to be food secure. If any of those elements are missing, we consider the community to be food insecure.
So I know a number of people are typing here, very condensed piece, but a pretty rich representation of one definition of conditions required for food security. We'll now contrast this with another very brief video from a different source, and we'll do the same thing. Invite you to chat in on what conditions these producers are suggesting are required for food security.
Food security, or the inverse idea of food insecurity, is determined by three factors.
Food security has three aspects. There's food availability, food access, and food utilization. Food availability is where there's enough food in a market or in a store in a particular area to buy, and there's enough food in the region for everyone to get enough food. Food access is where there's problems with actually having enough money to buy that food where you need to buy it. And food utilization, it has to do with the health of the individual who's actually eating the food. So you can have food security problem simply due to illness and disease.
And once again, as before, there are multiple different answers available here, somewhat contending between the first video, we saw the video 3 and video 4. And again, in a classroom, in a community context, this is a great opportunity to ask people to just reflect for themselves on what conditions they think are required to create food security. Where do they see it in their own community, and where are the deficiencies? So this is an opportunity to start a conversation. As I said earlier, I've been doing this in community settings, wonderful conference that our local state representative put forth, our local food co-op. And I want to remind people that all of these videos that you're seeing are available on our website, and the downloads are free. So you can use them and bring them with you and use those as the basis for your work. So I want to move forward now. We've been talking about content goals, but now I want to talk a little bit about media literacy goals, and in particular, this has to do with the goal of authorship, and we'll introduce our first poll. Before we do that, though, I want to simply say that there are two different sources to produce these two videos, Democracy Now! And NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. And so let's do a poll and weigh in, if you will now, which video do you think NASA produced? Video 3 or video 4? I'll be quiet for a minute and let the voting begin. And as important as the poll, probably more important, is this next set, which is what evidence from the videos and mission statements informed your response. So please take a minute and type in, where's your evidence in these documents that encourage you to think that it was either NASA or Democracy Now! Producing video 4. So already, I know others are typing. Please keep typing. I want you to notice the rich conversations that can be had face-to-face around this. They have to do with techniques, graphics, imagery. Then we move into the whole question about objectivity. What does that mean? Does it exist? Let's talk about that. Bob and Maura talking about democracy now, who they're usually their primary respondents, oftentimes grassroots community people. And so it's a very interesting conversation that can be had here about who the producers are of the media documents that we consume, which of course is equally important in our estimation, in our goals here, to begin to unearth and talk about in our classrooms. Not just the content on food security, but also about who's telling us what and why. And why do we believe it? Very rich conversation already going on. Now, I'm going to keep moving, but I just want to note how wonderful the community dialogue has already been, both in terms of reflections on the documents and then people reflecting on their own experience in their home communities. I want to just note here, before we leave this lesson, that the last part of this lesson, again, available free and online, takes a look at text. Before I do that, I just realized I didn't tell you who actually had produced that video, and it was NASA who produced video 4, which I think was most of the polling led in that direction. We followed these video documents with 4 text-based documents. And I want to make the point that text as an essential media form often gets forgotten these days. But text is rather important. And so we're not going to forget text as a central form of information in a digital video age. And the next part of this lesson had 4 reading excerpts, each one 2 pages long, from 4 very different sources: Cultural Survivor Quarterly, Oxfam, the major international NGO, U.S. Agency for International Development, and Monsanto. Each one of these sources, as you might imagine, addresses the content question about solutions to food insecurity in a very different way. And so this is an opportunity to take the initial questions: what causes food insecurity, what's required for food security, move it to the next direction in terms of talking about solutions in a way that's much more complex. It also gives us the opportunity in a Common Core setting, for those of you who are teaching the Common Core skills, to integrate and evaluate multiple sources of information in diverse formats. I think it's a really nice lesson that puts those together. And in a media literacy instance, again, we're asking the same question: who do you think developed each of these readings? Because we're not ascribing the authorship in the reading itself, and that's partly what we want students to grapple with as well. The bias, the perspective that's present in all of these media documents. Okay, I want to move now to another lesson. This is lesson 17 in the same video, in the same collection, on guiding our food choices. And there are, once again, 3 different sets of goals. The content goals in this instance will be messages about sustainability in food, and in particular, how that relates to our personal, social, and environmental health implications for our own food choices, really bringing it home. The Common Core skill addressed in this particular lesson will be reading and history and social studies, evaluating authors of multiple points of view. And in particular, we'll be looking at techniques that are used to further media messages. And this is a sample from the lesson plan that you'll find in our collection online. Students considering how food choices impact personal, social, and environmental health, analyzing web pages and food diagrams to discern messages, communication techniques, and once again, how the source's mission helps to shape media messages. And finally, and importantly, as we move toward action, students discuss the connection and or disconnection between their personal food choices and issues of sustainability. So let's move on to a chat. This is a web page from the USDA, and I want to invite you to chat in. What are the messages about sustainability in food on this web page, and what techniques are used to convey that message? I see Cindy is typing, and I want to encourage other people to weigh in as well. Messages about sustainability and techniques to further the message. I'll be quiet while people are typing. So I want to note as people are typing that there are lots of different ways to interpret this. We can go right to sort of the nutritional guidelines, which seems to be what USDA message seems to be for many of us who are typing in. But then others suggesting that the larger issues here are not really being brought forward, really has very little to do with sustainability. In a classroom, this document, along with the three that follow it, together as a set, give us an opportunity to talk about what we mean by sustainability, and to look at it in a perhaps a more complex way. I'm going to move on to the next one. We'll do the same question. You may be familiar with this source. Again, same thing. Messages about sustainability in food and techniques used to convey the message. So as people are typing, I just want to note the rich opportunities for discussion here. We can talk about technique. McDonald's pays an awful lot of money, as does USDA, to create messages that they want people to consume and to take. John suggests that since it's a McDonald's ad, it's all greenwashing, apologizing for his bias. And of course, in our classroom, we're going to say really important for us all to name what our bias is. We all bring that from all sorts of different points of view, and to talk about, to decode that, to explore that in multiple ways. And also to reflect on if this adds to or subtracts from or is essentially equivalent to the images that you just saw on the prior page. Getting choices here, no plan. And I realize that we're not having an awful lot of time to linger with each of these documents. We could spend a great deal of time on just the two that we've seen and look at them in more depth. I'm going to keep moving forward simply to give you a chance to bring two more references into the mix. Really great comments. All right, here's another one that we selected here from MSNBC, Messages about Sustainability in Food. And again, the companion question, what's the evidence in the document? What are the techniques used to convey the message? So now we're moving into perceptions around economics. Interesting that they chose to set this in fair way. Don't know whether that has any centrality in the choice of the image. Oftentimes it does. What's fair and what's not fair about living on $68.88 a week as opposed to what Oxfam just reported the top 1% live on. Again, deep opportunities for us now to take the conversation in a different level, perhaps, to introduce more larger system analysis, economics, and then talking about what MSNBC's role may be in helping to shape our perspective. I'm going to now move. I know people are still typing. We could stay with this one for a long time, but I'm going to move on to another one here. This is the last one of the four that we're going to take a look at, and I'm actually going to highlight the centerpiece of this. Real Food Challenge, the producers of this, describe themselves as a student-led campaign representing thousands of students who are already working to create a more just and sustainable food system, have documented a commitment to the highest ideals of environmental sustainability and social justice. I didn't read you the mission statements of the USDA, McDonald's, and MSNBC. They are available in your handout, by the way. But I figured probably few of us would know about the Real Food Challenge. So let's hear what your thoughts are about this. Messages about sustainability in food, techniques used to convey the message, and noticings, contrasting this with what you've already seen. Lots of comments here about systems connections, webs of connection. Also comments about perhaps there's too much here for everyone to sort of get our heads around. What does that mean? So this is an opportunity both to significantly deepen the understanding about what we mean by sustainability compared to the prior documents that we took a look at, but also at the same time an opportunity to talk about what's effective in communication techniques. And so I'm going to move on to my final chat question for this set. Why did I choose this set of images for this decoding question on messages about food and sustainability? While you type, I'll just note that in the actual lesson as it's presented in our kit, there are 15 different images from a wide variety of different sources, including Potawatomi Native American Health Center, a vegan food poster, an advertising firm, Whole Foods, so a range of different ones. But when it comes to pedagogy, teaching to my content and media literacy goals, why did I choose these? And yes, as Maura says, government, corporate, nonprofit, news. I wanted examples from different sectors so that we're not simply looking at media as multi-billion-dollar corporate productions, but media also as, in this instance, student-produced in a real food image. Examples from different sources enabling us to do deep contrasts of messages, production, differences in perspective, and as Linlin said, it's more than an individual option. It gives us an opportunity to look from different perspectives from different sources. I could have picked 4 different ones as well, but I thought this did a nice job in a short way of allowing us to take a look at a complex set. I know people are continuing to type. Please continue the conversation in the chat room. I'm going to move it on as you do that and walk us through one last lesson example before I actually show you a video demonstration of teaching in the classroom around issues of food security. And in this instance, I'm just going to talk about a way to really make much more complex a lesson set dealing with issues of food security systems. This particular lesson comes from our media collection, Media Construction and Sustainability in the Finger Lakes. It's the first collection that we've done that really focuses on regional media and regional issues. We did this because we felt it was very important to locate discussions, particularly around issues of sustainability, in specific food sheds, watersheds, communities where people live, as an example that people can use in other parts of the country and parts of the world. So we're really trying to look at things from both a local and regional perspective, but also in a much more sort of complex way. This lesson in particular would be done at the high level in high school and in college. The content goals here are components of what are the components of sustainable food security community systems, and how can we take personal action on food security? And the common core skills have to do with speaking and listening, coming to discussions prepared. This is really rich in conversation. And finally, media literacy skill has to do with constructing compelling questions. And I just want to note that the capacity to ask questions is as or more important than the capacity to answer them when it comes to media literacy skills. This lesson, like most of ours, begins with rather complex student reading, introducing the concept of sustainable food security systems within a particular bioregion. It begins with instructions to the leader, and in this instance, we're letting the teacher know that we're looking at security systems through a number of lenses: access, culture, employment, environment, health, ownership, scale, and worker safety. I'll give you an example of how it looks in the lens of access. The subgroups of students that would be assigned this lens of access will be shown 3 different documents that I'm about to show you, and then ask themselves to work together to answer some questions. How do the patterns of access differ between lower income neighborhoods and those with more wealth? The second question, what's being done to increase access to create an inclusive system as represented in this document? And then finally asking students to add at least one open-ended question for their own lens, a question that they themselves come up with. And then concluding, why is it important to include this lens of access in any analysis of food security systems? I'm going to give you an example now of the 3 media documents we chose around the topic of access. In this instance, there's a web page from a grassroots movement in Syracuse, part of the Finger Lakes, and asking students these questions. How do patterns of access differ between lower income, more wealthy neighborhoods? What's being done according to this document to increase access? And then we'll compare that with a second document. This is from a local supermarket chain, encouraging people to give $1 or $2 as they check out to donate to a local hunger bank. And finally, a food blog, someone who is writing about food options for low-income people, farmers markets, ethnic markets, discount food stores. Another commentary around access. Once students have digested these, they would be asked to then lead a presentation in class to their peers, who themselves are looking at other aspects of other lenses of food security, in order to create a collective representation of what community food security might look like. I'm going to show you another set of 3 around issues of culture. In this instance, different questions. How well does the food system provide culturally acceptable food to diverse peoples? Something that Malik Yakini referenced in the Detroit Food Security Network video we saw earlier. How could a food system better include different cultural preferences? And these, again, are analyzed by looking at 3 different media documents. In this instance, from the Iroquois White Corn Project in upstate New York, Ontario County, from a restaurant here in Ithaca, represented in Edible Finger Lakes magazine, run by people originally from Mexico, and from a newsletter article about Roots and Fruits, a local initiative for African-focused foods. And in each instance, we're asking how well does the food system provide culturally acceptable food, and how could a food system better include different cultural perspectives? So I'll go back to that for a minute. That's a much more complex way to take a look at these issues of food security using students' collective work to come to some conclusions. I want to move now to our last video. This is a second half of a video that we're going to take a look at. Those of you who may have attended the Earth Day video, the Earth Day webinar, saw the first part of this, which was a pre-World War II era video about traditional community farming. And the chat here is we're asking what you notice regarding the teaching process and what questions might help students develop an understanding of food security systems. So please weigh in as you watch.
We're going to look at a different clip right now. And then I want you to do some comparison. But same question. What do you think of the messages here about farmers and farming in this second clip?
Every year, it's important to look at the big picture to determine your best crop options. Pioneer has the wide-angle vision and the focused resources to help you create the most from every acre. Collaborate in a big way for big success. Pioneer. Science with service, delivering success.
Messages about farmers and farming. Jonathan, what message?
From the second clip, it's kind of stating that farming no longer is for the community, more of it's no national thing. Like the gentleman said, it's creating the most from every acre. So like producing a lot more for national and global consumption.
So it's now about national and global, no longer so much about community. Excellent. JJ.
Yeah, he also, the announcer kept emphasizing the word big, whereas the first clip was very like small town, small farms, and this one is, collaborate and technology and big. And it's just
big, collaborate, technology, Katrina.
Yeah, going along with that, I felt that this clip was more about industry and capitalism, and maybe even taking advantage of like farming and natural lands, as opposed to the first one.
Say that last part again.
More about maybe taking advantage of our environment and not showing as much respect as the first one.
It was or wasn't showing as much respect as the first one?
The second one wasn't showing as much respect.
What made you say that?
Just, it's more taking a step back from it. It's not as intimate.
You said taking advantage. Raise your hand if you agree that the second one wasn't as respectful to the environment. Shaniqua, say what you think about that.
So from the first clip, I thought, I felt a strong sense of community, right? You saw farmers and like everybody else mentioned, people really stuck together. And now with this other one, it was more about like the company or corporation, I'm not sure, Pioneer, and their tip to say, this is what we're going to do about farming or, whatever the case is. And I thought it was interesting because you just see, one sense, it's like, I think it was better in the first clip, like you saw more of community, is that this corporation is like taking over now and saying this is what we're doing now. So I
hear some very clear judgment on your part about good versus bad, and that's okay, Rob.
Yeah, I thought it was so interesting because if you looked at the farmer in the second clip, like he's like, they're both wearing like dress shirts, like they look like business people, and I'm like, well, I don't know any farmers who wear slacks. You know, I mean, I don't know so many farmers, but still.
Was this one romanticized?
I don't, not at all.
Not at all. Would you agree? Or was there a romantic vision here at all? Carly?
I think there was a romantic vision. It was just more far removed. Like the romanticized part was making a profit. So like in the first one, they kind of have the whole life cycle of the product. Like they're saying like this corn that we have was just hanging above the pumpkins, and like having the corn for the community was the goal. But for the second one, like the goal was money, and it definitely like romanticized farming as like this modern, technological, capitalistic field. So like,
where did you see the romance? Anybody, if you see that as romantic at all. Carly, where did you see the romance?
I guess just like they looked so happy, and they were in such like a futuristic like green room with these screens, greenhouse. Like.
Yeah.
Also, like I saw it in like the music they had. It was really loud, like big sounding music, and in the first one it was like really quiet. Like you almost don't even notice the music in the first one, but the second one it's like you can't not hear it. It's so loud and big.
So you're really getting at some of the distinctions. I want to know about context. What's the historical context of the second one? Is this historic or is it contemporary, the Pioneer ad? Contemporary, a much more contemporary one. What's the difference between the context of the 1930s, when that first black and white film was made, and today in terms of farming?
I want to note that there are some wonderful comments in terms of noting what the particular strengths of the teaching process are. I'm just going to want to run through a handful of what people said. The teacher said very little. Actually, it's interesting to just compare the amount of time the teacher spoke to our experience of teachers speaking in class, and to talk about what teachers' roles might be in that regard. Lots of probing, lots of questions, lots of probing for evidence, teachers seeming to be more of a facilitator than a professor, the whole sense of community that can come in a classroom, the role of smiling, facial gestures, and how we make one another comfortable and yet willing to deal with contentious issues. So very important observations here, I think, in terms of just reflecting on what makes for good teaching. And as I said at the outset, looking at the initial graphic, partly what we want to do is to really reflect on, in this webinar and in our classes, what makes for teaching, what makes for learning, who are teachers, who are learners. I'm going to move now. We've got 5 minutes left in the formal time. We're going to stick around after to continue the conversation for people who want to. The take-home points from the webinar today: define your goals before you create your lessons in terms of what you're trying to teach for content and skills. Let your learning goals determine your document choices, and keep your classroom process inquiry-based. More questions than answers. Invite critical questioning and respectful debate. Uncover the media constructions always. Question the source, even if it's a source, perhaps especially if it's a source you agree with, and bring forward divergent and hidden perspectives. Really important. A few resources I want to bring to your attention in the current fall 2014 issue of Green Teacher magazine, available at greenteacher.com. An article I wrote on sustainability, education, and media literacy. In particular, this focuses on how to help students go to deep discussions involving deep emotion around profound earth changes in a way that's safe and genuine. There's also a webinar that I did for Green Teacher that's available as well. There's our next webinar in March will be on energy choices. You'll get notice of that, having attended this one. I want to reference the Namely conference again that there was much discussion of before we started in Philadelphia this summer. Also, Project Look Sharp does a wonderful Summer Institute immersion in theory, practice, and production training If you have any interest in the work that I've been referencing to go deeper with that, the Summer Institute's a great opportunity to do that. And finally, I just want to thank you for joining us today. It's been a very rich dialogue. So wonderful to have you with us. Before we take Q&A, I do want to ask people to give us some feedback about this webinar. That's how we improve our webinar. And so take a few minutes, if you will, click on that link to the survey. It won't take you long. You can connect with Project Look Sharp at the addresses above. I also want to thank Kelsey, Lou, Sherry, and Cindy for all your wonderful support making this happen. It wouldn't be here if it weren't for them. And I know it's 3 minutes to 8. We will stop at 8 o'clock, but I do want to invite people to ask questions or simply to put out your own comments about how you integrate media literacy with sustainability content. So, thank you. And I'll invite Cindy to step up too, to unmute and to participate in the discussion if you'd like. And as I said, we're going to stay on till probably 8:10, 8:15 if people would like to. So there's still quite a few people in the room. So please feel free to stay on and chat some.
Thanks so much, Fox. And I just want to remind everybody that the materials that Fox was using in the webinar, most of them, if not all of them, are available on the Project Look Sharp website for free as part of our curriculum kits. And the video clips can be streamed. The PowerPoint slides of all of those examples can just be downloaded along with the teacher guide. So please share these with anyone you know. Pass them along to other educators. And this was just a wonderful, I'll echo Fox's response. This was a wonderful conversation. I also want to say that we have a number of videos that demonstrate this inquiry-based process of leading a media decoding. And as so many people noted, it looks like these students are particularly wonderful, and some of them are mine, and they were wonderful. But the most impressive thing to us is that it's not so much about the particular students. It's really about this approach of asking questions rather than just telling, and then listening to the answers and probing for evidence. That's really the key. So I encourage you to take a look at these videos. We have them featuring Chris Sperry, who you saw in the video, myself, and also an elementary school teacher doing the same thing. So,
Cindy, I want to now turn our attention to some of the comments. I'll start with Barbara's about how challenging it can be sometimes to engage young teenagers with diverse opinions. Couldn't agree more. One of the things in the article for Green Teacher that I talk about is how do you create safe space to deal with deep emotion. And the topics we were talking about tonight were perhaps not that level of deep emotion necessarily, but this is critical. And so I think in order to do what we're talking about, particularly if we're going deeply into content issues that can be contentious, we have to be clear as teachers that creating a safe container is central to what the process is. And any teacher who's been teaching for a long time knows that's true in any case. But we really need to be talking about that and talking about that explicitly with our students as we move into this dialogue. And I would argue that this is not just the case with young teenagers, although that's a particularly challenged group in that regard. But it can also be true in community settings, as Thomas talks about, popular education settings, where there are strongly contentious issues. And this is where my responsibility as a teacher and facilitator is to lead by talking about what it means to practice do no harm in the context of a learning experience. I spent 22 years before joining Project Look Sharp with a group called the Center for Nonviolence, working with men who batter and teenagers who've had violence problems in terms of nonviolence education, understanding how we can be together with one another and coexist without using power and control. So one of the things I learned from those many years is that being explicit about what our intentions are for this discussion and how we expect one another to treat one another, and being willing to deal with disrespect when it comes up on its face is really critical. So I want to read Thomas's question. Can you comment on possibility of using understanding of decoding media with creating codes used as media in popular education settings? Well, Thomas, I was really led to this work by the work of Paulo Freire, the great Brazilian educator who wrote Pedagogy of the Oppressed, Pedagogy of the Heart, so many other wonderful things. And I was introduced to the whole idea of a code by Paulo's work. One of the most extraordinary human beings I've ever met. And I'm referencing that because there's not enough time right now to talk about that, but I think if you're interested in codes, from my perspective, the media that we're using tonight are very similar to the kind of codes that Paulo Freire used with, on the one hand, illiterate peasants in Brazil, but people who had a great deal of world experience. And they brought that world experience, reading their world, toward learning to read the Word at the same time. So I absolutely see this as a critical way to do popular education. Rebecca, do you think K-12 teachers, do you need K-12 teachers to partner with? Love to be involved in testing newly created modules. Absolutely. We're actually working right now, Rebecca, on a new series of lessons for middle school and lower and upper elementary school that had to do with sustainability topics. We got a grant from our wonderful supporters, the Park Foundation, several years ago to do this, or just this past year, sorry. We're just starting this process, and we're looking for people to field test some of the materials. So if you would email to Project LookSharp, we'll get that, and I will respond directly to you if you have an interest in doing that. That would be just great.
Yep, and I wrote exactly the same thing that Fox just said, that we're always looking for people who are willing to both use our materials, which anybody can do for free, but also who would be willing to talk with us about how it works, and in some cases allow us to come into your classroom if it's within drivable distance, to just observe and note how the students are responding, what seems to work, what the challenges are, and then typically what we do is talk with teachers afterwards about what they noticed, and what other kinds of support they need in order to make this work more effective. So it would be wonderful to have you, and I love that you're calling us a gang. I think that's what we should refer to ourselves as, the PLF gang, like the hole in the wall gang. I think we're always looking for new names for ourselves, so I think that's great. So yeah.
So I just want to
and anybody else who's interested, do the same.
I want to invite people who do have questions. We're about 5 after. I think we're going to go another 5 minutes, no more than 10 minutes, but I noticed that there's still quite a lot of people in the room. So if you have questions or comments, please put them on up. This is an opportunity to do some back and forth in an interactive way.
Here we go. And I know that Thomas is maybe responding to Kelsey's questions about what you mean about codes. I just want to say that media literacy, like literacy, involves both analyzing media messages and creating media messages. So maybe that's part of what Thomas is referring to. Yeah, I really like what you just said. I think this fits particularly well with food justice and other justice issues, but also that part of the work we encourage teachers to do is to follow up on these analysis and evaluation activities by having students create their own media messages. and create those in particular to represent a particular organization or a point of view, or to get across a particular viewpoint. There's lots of different ways to continue to do this. So really love it. That idea of playing off of codes and encouraging students to create their own media messages and to look at what their purposes are and their techniques are.
Cindy, I want to jump in here and respond to Thomas's comments. I really like what you said, Thomas, and I'm reflecting on a book that I'm reading right now that has to do with codes and particular perspectives loaded in codes and metaphors. And this is from a book that just published by Antonio Lopez called Greening Media Education. Great book in which Antonio talks about sort of the implicit codes around different ways in which we view the world and sustainability, environmental issues in particular, from a mechanistic lens, or what he's calling an ecosystem lens, very different, but sort of the underlying understandings and worldviews that are present are ones that these media documents can provide us an avenue to really inquire and take more deeply. So it's a great book. I'd recommend it to anybody. Antonio Lopez, Greening Media Education. If students produce media messages for a class project, will you be interested in seeing the results? Would love to. Franklin, one of the things that we really want to try to do is more and more bring student-produced media and media documents into the discussion. And like bringing Real Food Challenge, a student-produced document, I'd love to do that from different perspectives, different age groups, so that we can really make clear to students that we're not just talking about analyzing adult-created constructions, but really encouraging students to participate in media construction and then media analysis and sharing with one another those construction and analyses. So it's a great idea. We've got a few more people typing, and then I think we'll move toward closing.
Sounds good, and I just want to encourage you to complete the very short survey that you can do just by clicking on the link on this final slide. That gives us a chance to evaluate how well our webinars are going. This is, a webinar in a series that we're producing, and as I think Sachs mentioned, we'll have our next webinar in March. In May, just so you know, I'm going to be doing a webinar on teaching about nutrition and consumer education for early elementary students, kindergarten through second grade, and basing that on some of the materials we already have online and some new curriculum materials that we've just developed to teach kids using media literacy as the focus and the pedagogy. And my students at Ithaca College have been evaluating the success of those lessons for the past 5 or 6 years. They're really terrific in terms of having an impact on kids' understanding and sometimes their behaviors as well.
I want to thank everybody for coming tonight and participating. You made it a very rich dialogue, and we certainly hope you'll come next time. Also, really want to encourage you to consider the 5-day summer intensive, which you can find more information about at our website. And I think you'll find really rich material there. But it's been wonderful to have you all here. Bob, great to have you participating. And when I close, I want to give a particular thanks to a dear friend of Bob's and mine, Jim Coplin, who passed a few years ago, who was central in my development as a teacher 40 years ago, and now and more recently as a curriculum writer. Jim really helped me understand what it means to go deeply into this material. So all thanks to JK. Okay, I'm signing off. Thanks again.